Welcome back to Declassified Diagnosis. Today we are opening a file that literally glows in the dark. It's about the women who painted time and paid for it with their lives. Fair warning before we start. This file contains descriptions of severe body horror and medical trauma. If you're squeamish, proceed with caution.
We are talking about the Radium Girls, the factory workers in the 1920s who were told to lick radioactive paintbrushes hundreds of times a day until their jaws fell off.
That is a terrifying image. Before we dive in, if you want to support the channel and help us uncover more dark history, please hit subscribe and share this video with a friend who thinks their job is toxic. It really helps us grow. Okay, so let's unpack this. We're about to do a deep dive into what is, I think, a truly pivotal and just horrifying moment in American history.
It really is. It's this collision point between scientific wonder and just catastrophic corporate negligence.
And it all starts with this thing called the radium craze. Before anyone really understood it as this deadly poison, radium, that's element 88, right?
That's right, element 88. And it was being sold to the public as a miracle cure.
A miracle cure.
That's really the essential context here. You have to understand that when radium was discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898, it seemed magical.
Because it glowed on its own.
Exactly. The Curies noted its ability to emit this constant, mesmerizing blue light and energy without, being used up.
Mm-hmm.
This phenomenon, which we now know as radioactivity, just completely captured the public's imagination.
So in the early 20th century, radioactivity wasn't scary. It was vital, powerful.
It was seen as an endless source of vitality, of therapeutic energy. It was completely new, and people thought it held the secret to life.
But the Curies themselves knew it was dangerous. I mean, they were sounding the alarm bells pretty early on, weren't they?
They were. The warnings were systematically ignored by the commercial sector. The Curies were, intimately familiar with the hazards. They suffered from radiation burns, chronic illness. Their work was incredibly cautious.
And when Marie Curie saw what was happening in American factories,
she was profoundly disturbed. She actually said she was surprised that the U.S. government would permit the handling of such dangerous substances in such a careless manner.
And she specifically pointed to the dial painters, right?
Okay. She looked at the method they were using, ingesting it day after day, and she called it, very clearly, criminal.
Criminal. But the companies making a fortune off this just suppressed that information.
They did. So the American public, and crucially the workers themselves, only ever saw the positive hype.
And the hype was, it was extraordinary. We're not just talking about glowing watches here. Radium became this full-blown commercial obsession. They called it liquid sunshine.
The list of products is genuinely astonishing. It really shows this widespread, almost utopian belief that radioactivity meant health.
So what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, radium was believed to restore health, cure everything from cancer to hay fever and gout. People thought it could help you live to be over 100 years old. For the elite, there were special tonics. Radithor was a big one, a radium water that wealthy customers would drink every single day.
They drank it?
Every day. And then pharmacies sold radioactive dressings, suppositories, pills.
It sounds like something from a dystopian movie, but this was real.
It was very real. And it wasn't just medicine. It seeped into everyday consumer goods.
Right, for every demographic.
For personal grooming, you could get radium-laced face creams, soaps, compact powders that all promised a youthful glow.
Like face cream, you're literally putting it on your skin thinking it's, what, a vitamin?
Exactly. And radioactive toothpaste, which guaranteed a brighter smile with every brushing.
Toothpaste. That's just, the irony is staggering. They were literally putting it in their mouths.
It's unbelievable. They even had radium jock straps and lingerie meant to boost fertility. Radium butter, radium milk.
Okay, that's insane. And you mentioned a product called the Radium Eclipse Sprayer. What was that?
Yes, that was a household cleaner. It was advertised to kill flies and mosquitoes, clean your porcelain.
And it was radioactive.
And advertised as harmless to humans. The idea of spraying radioactive compounds inside your home to clean it is terrifying to us. But back then, radium was just synonymous with power and safety.
So that sets the stage. You've got this dangerous substance being sold as a miracle cure, all driven by public ignorance and, let's be honest, overwhelming corporate greed.
A perfect storm.
Which brings us to the company at the heart of this, the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation, or RLMC.
RLMC was founded in Newark, New Jersey in 1913. It later became the United States Radium Corporation, or USRC, and their entire business was built on this luminous paint they called Undark.
And what was an undark, exactly?
It was a very simple but very dangerous formula. A tiny amount of radium powder mixed with zinc sulfide.
Which is the part that actually glows, right?
Yes, the zinc sulfide fluoresces, and then you have a gum Arabic adhesive to bind it all together. When the radium's radiation hits the zinc sulfide, you get that classic greenish-white glow.
One of the co-founders, Sabin von Sochaki, was the chemist who invented it. And he had studied under the Curies, so he knew. He absolutely knew the risks.
His knowledge is probably the most damning piece of the whole puzzle. Sochaki didn't just study under the people who knew a kilogram of radium would kill you. He had a direct personal lesson.
What do you mean?
In 1913, while working with radium solutions, he severely contaminated his own left index finger. The tissue death, the necrosis, was so advanced that he had to physically hack the finger off himself.
Yes, I'm sorry, he cut his own finger off.
To stop the spread of the radiation damage? Yes.
So a man who literally amputating part of his own body because of this element then went on to build a company where young women handled it completely unprotected.
It's the ultimate example of profit over safety. He understood internal contamination perfectly, yet he commercialized a product that required young women to put that very substance in their mouths.
So why on earth did these young women take the job? Even if they were told it was safe, what was the big appeal?
The job was genuinely considered elite. It was covetable, especially for the kind of women they were hiring.
And who were they?
Mostly young women, many of them teenagers, often recent immigrants or from working-class families in Newark, New Jersey, and later Ottawa, Illinois. For them, this was an incredible opportunity.
Because the pay was so good.
The pay was phenomenal. They were paid by volume, about 1.5 cents for every dial they painted. The fastest girls could earn up to $20 a week.
Which in 1920 was a fortune.
It's equivalent to over $370 today. It was often 3 times what a normal factory worker made. Many of these girls were earning more than their own fathers.
So they must have felt like they'd hit the jackpot.
They felt blessed. It was clean, detailed work, not like a normal factory. And they were incredibly proud. They called themselves the Shining Girls because the job literally made them glow in the dark. It was like a badge of honor.
And then World War I comes along and demand just explodes.
It absolutely skyrockets. When the U.S. entered the war in 1917, suddenly, luminous dials were essential for the military.
Right, for soldiers' watches, airplane instruments.
Exactly. Gun sights, ship compasses. The work went from being a commercial luxury to a patriotic necessity. By 1918, something like 95% of all radium produced in the U.S. was being used for this paint.
So they're earning great money, and they feel like they're helping the war effort.
Yes, they felt they were lighting the way for the military. It's just a tragic irony, isn't it? They were serving their country while being systematically poisoned by their employers.
So we've set the stage. The job is desirable. The company knows the risks. Now we have to get to the actual procedure, the technique at the heart of this whole tragedy.
And we need to explain the procedure clearly. The technique was called lip dip paint. To get a fine point on the brush, they were taught to put the brush in their mouth, dip it in the radium, paint the watch dial. They did this for every single number. Lip, dip, paint.
So they were essentially eating nuclear waste all day long.
Exactly. And the company, United States Radium Corporation, told them it was safe. They said it would make their cheeks glow and make them beautiful.
Using the literal symptom of their poisoning as a selling point.
Yeah.
That's just gut-wrenching. Okay, let's break down the mechanics. Why was this specific technique even necessary?
Well, the dials were tiny. A pocket watch face might be, 3.5 centimeters across? And the numbers they were painting could be as small as a single millimeter wide.
And the brushes they used?
They were slim camel hair brushes, very soft, but they spread out easily. To get that fine, precise point needed for a tiny number, they had to shape it.
And if they messed up, if the paint went over the line?
The dial was rejected, they had to start over, and they wouldn't get paid for it, so precision was everything.
And lipping the brush was the fastest way to get that point.
Yes. The technique actually came from China painting factories. Artists would use saliva to shake the bristles, but they were using inert clay pigments. Here the material was radium.
How many times a day would they do this?
Hundreds. They might lip the brush 2 or 3 times for a single number, and they painted hundreds of dials a day. They were ingesting measurable, dangerous doses of radium in every single shift.
And you said this was a uniquely American practice. Other countries weren't doing this.
That's a critical point. It really underscores the negligence. In Europe, in Switzerland and France, where they'd been using this paint for over a decade, lipping brushes was not the standard.
So what did they use instead?
They used solid glass rods or small sticks with cotton wadding. For the fine work, they'd use sharpened wooden styli or metal needles, anything that prevented ingestion.
So if the U.S. company had just used the European method, this entire disaster could have been avoided.
It could have been. Instead, they chose the fastest, cheapest, and most dangerous method, and beyond the brushes, the whole factory was. It was just saturated with radium dust.
Right, because they were trying to save every last particle.
Radium was incredibly expensive, about $120,000 a gram at the time. So to save money, they made the girls go into a dark room before leaving work to be brushed off. The sparkling particles on the floor were swept up and reused in the next day's paint.
That obsession with salvaging a few flecks of dust while poisoning dozens of workers it's just so telling.
And of course, the brushing didn't work. The contamination was everywhere. It was on their hands, their arms, their dresses, their corsets. And because of the zinc sulfide, they would literally shine in the dark when they left the factory.
Which is how they got the nickname, the Ghost Girls.
Exactly. They were covered in this ghostly glow. They thought it was fun. They'd paint their fingernails with it, dust it in their hair to surprise their dates. They had absolutely no reason to think this liquid sunshine was anything but harmless.
This is where the story moves from negligence to something that feels actively criminal. The double standard of protection inside the factory.
This is the definitive proof of corporate awareness. The company knew how dangerous raw radium was. In the orange plant, the lab workers, who were all men, handled the raw radium salts.
And they got protective gear.
Yes. They got lead-lined aprons and ivory forceps for handling the material.
But the women, who were literally eating it, got nothing. Why? What was the company's logic there?
It's a technical distinction, but a crucial one. Radium emits different kinds of radiation. The men were dealing with external exposure to gamma rays, which are highly penetrating, like X-rays. Lead aprons can block that.
Okay, so they were protecting the men from external burns.
Right, but the women were ingesting it. Radium-226 is an alpha emitter. Alpha particles are huge. They can be stopped by a piece of paper or your skin. They're only dangerous when they're inside your body.
And once they're inside?
They become deadly. They're continuously radiating the tissue right next to them where the radium settles in the bone. No lead apron can stop that. The women needed air filtration and safe handling, not lead aprons.
Instead, they were told it was safe.
Repeatedly. The managers told them the tiny amount in the paint couldn't possibly hurt them. All while the men in the next room, who were protected, knew the material required great precautions.
But you mentioned that von Sachaki, the inventor who cut off his own finger, he did try to warn them once.
He did, but it was too little, too late. On a rare visit to the studio floor, he saw the girls lipping their brushes and he said, "Do not do that, you will get sick."
And did they listen?
For a moment, maybe. But he wasn't their supervisor. Their bosses, the ones who paid them for speed, told them it was harmless, so they went right back to the routine. Lip, dip, paint. Later, Sachaki published a paper saying radium must be handled with the greatest precautions. That knowledge was there, inside the company, but it was actively kept from the workers.
The consequences, sadly, were inevitable. It just took a few years to show up.
Around 1921, the first signs began to appear, and the delay is important. This wasn't immediate. It was a slow, cumulative destruction.
What were the first symptoms? What did the girls start to experience?
At first, it was insidious. It mimicked common complaints. They'd have constant nagging toothaches, painful mouth sores, and ulcers that just wouldn't heal. And these vague, generalized aches and pains deep in their hips and their feet.
Why, they're the hips and feet.
Because radium mimics calcium, it attacks areas of high bone turnover first. And the jaw is the most active in that regard.
So the symptoms went from chronic pain to something much, much worse.
Yes. The decay was absolutely gruesome. Their teeth started falling out on their own. The mouth sores got deeper and deeper because the radiation was destroying the body's ability to repair itself.
I read one story that was just unbelievable.
There are so many. In one case, a young woman lost all her teeth and her jawbone was so decayed that her dentist just reached into her mouth and pulled the bone out. It came out in one piece.
My God. And the infections must have been terrible.
Rampant. One girl died from a fatal hemorrhage because a mouth sore burrowed so deep it pierced her jugular vein. The necrosis, the tissue death, made eating impossible. Many of the women just wasted away.
And the doctors at the time, they had no idea what was causing this.
They were completely baffled. This was a new kind of industrial poisoning. Dentists first thought it was phossy jaw, which comes from phosphorus poisoning.
Right, that was a known thing from the matchstick industry.
Exactly. But tests for phosphorus came back normal. Some doctors started to suspect it was an occupational condition, but without understanding radium's long-term effects, they were just stumped.
This brings us to the first major victim, the woman whose story really defined this entire tragedy.
Yes, we have to tell the story of Molly Maggia. Her symptoms were classic. First, a toothache, then ulcers. Then, the jawbone itself began to die. And we need to define the word necrosis. It comes from the Greek word for death. It means the bone tissue literally died inside her living body. When her dentist touched her jaw, it broke off in his hands.
That is a nightmare. And the company? Did they help?
No. They launched a smear campaign. They paid doctors to write syphilis on her death certificate to ruin her reputation so she couldn't sue.
That is just a level of calculated cruelty that's hard to wrap your head around. They didn't just deny it. They actively tried to ruin the reputations of the women they were killing.
It was their official corporate strategy. Molly Maggia died in 1922, and her death and the death of many others were publicly blamed on syphilis. It allowed the company to claim their health issues were due to, promiscuity, not their product.
And they tried to back this up internally with their own experts.
They did. As more girls got sick, USRC hired a toxicologist. And it's important to note, he was not a medical doctor who was already on their payroll. He examined the girls and told them they were in perfectly good health.
Pure gaslighting.
It was corporate protectionism disguised as a medical stamp of approval, but they made a huge mistake. They also hired a real respected physiology professor to do an independent study.
And his report was damning.
Absolutely. It showed the entire factory was contaminated and the women's blood was abnormal from radiation exposure. So what did USRC do? They rewrote the report. They literally changed the sections to say the women were fine.
They manufactured false data.
They did. But thankfully, a colleague convinced the professor to publish the original real findings, despite huge corporate pressure. And we also have to remember Dr. Willis, one of the original co-founders who had also suffered from radium poisoning himself.
He had to have his thumb amputated.
Yes, and he published warnings in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1923, right before he died. He explicitly warned that ignoring precautions with radium may result in serious injury. The company had internal published warnings, and they just kept denying everything.
All of this pain, this decay, this cover-up, it all comes down to a specific chemical process. We need to understand the science of why radium attacked the bones, and especially the jaw, so brutally. But why the jaw? Why did it go for the bones?
The chemistry is actually quite simple. Radium is chemically very similar to calcium. The human body mistakes the poison for a nutrient. It absorbs the radium and deposits it directly into the bones, thinking it is making them stronger. Once it's in the bone, it never leaves.
So their own skeletons were radioactive.
Yes. In fact, when they exhumed Molly's body 5 years later, her coffin glowed on the X-ray film.
That is truly terrifying proof.
Yeah.
It's this simple mistake by the body calcium absorption that leads to this slow-motion atomic disintegration.
Exactly. The problem with radium-226 is that chemical mimicry, plus its incredibly long half-life.
How long is it?
1,600 years.
1,600. So once it's locked into your bones, it's there forever, just constantly emitting radiation.
Precisely. The body is always breaking down and rebuilding bones, so when the radium was ingested, the body seized it and permanently wove it into the skeletal structure. And as we said, especially in high turnover areas like the jaw and spine.
And those alpha particles we talked about, the ones that are only dangerous inside the body.
Once they're embedded in the skeleton, they're continuously radiating the surrounding tissue, the bone cells, the cartilage, and most critically, the bone marrow.
What does that do to the body's systems?
It causes total systemic destruction. It destroys the stem cells in the bone marrow that produce blood, leading to severe anemia and often leukemia. It causes bone cancer, and it causes the bones themselves to become brittle and weak, leading to fractures. The jawbone necrosis was just the most visible, most aggressive sign of the whole skeleton dissolving.
And the final, undeniable proof of this didn't come until they took that dramatic step of exhuming Molly Maggia's body.
Her body was the scientific smoking gun. The exhumation was on October 15th, 1927. It was a huge event, arranged by the girl's lawyer, Raymond Barry. 13 officials were there, company men, doctors, and Molly's own family.
That must have been horrific for them.
Unimaginable. When they raised the rotting wooden coffin, observers noted an unmistakable sign of radium. The inside of the coffin was glowing with this soft luminescence.
Radioluminescence.
Yes, the radium had permeated everything, and Molly's body was remarkably well preserved, likely because of the heavy metal compounds. The autopsy began right away.
And they had to dissect her remains to find the evidence.
They did. They removed her upper jawbones. The lower jaw was already gone, of course. They sawed through her spine, her head, her ribs. They reduced sections of bone to ash for testing. But the most dramatic evidence was visual. It came from the X-rays.
X-rays of a body that had been dead for 5 years.
Molly was finally speaking from the grave. When the film was processed, the radium deposits acted like internal X-ray sources. Her bones created these glaring white images on the black film. Her vertebrae just glowed.
And the skull.
The image of her skull, missing the lower jaw, made her mouth look like it was stretched wide open. Observers at the time said she looked like she was screaming for justice.
Wow. And that was it. That was the definitive proof.
The official finding was unequivocal. It shattered the company's syphilis lie. The doctors concluded no evidence of disease, in particular no evidence of syphilis. Instead, they found that each and every portion of tissue and bone tested gave evidence of radioactivity.
So with that scientific truth, the surviving girls finally had the ammunition they needed for a real fight in court.
They did. But it was still an incredibly difficult process. The initial fight was led by 5 women in New Jersey: Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, and 2 of Molly's sisters, Quinta and Albina.
And Grace Fryer, she had to search for 2 years just to find a lawyer who would take the case.
2 years. While she was dying from radiation sickness, it just shows you the power dynamics they were up against. Suing a huge corporation for an occupational disease that wasn't even medically recognized yet. It was almost impossible.
And by the time the trial started in 1928, the women were desperately ill.
So ill that when they had to take the oath in court, none of them could even raise their hands. Their joints were too deteriorated, the pain too intense. They knew they were dying.
And USRC knew that too. Their legal strategy was just predatory.
It was simple: delay, delay, delay. They kept asking for continuances, hoping the girls would die before they could testify, which would just dissolve the case.
And the judge had stock in the company.
A blatant conflict of interest. The whole thing created a huge public backlash in the press.
So the media pressure finally worked.
It did. USRC couldn't handle the PR disaster. On June 4, 1928, they settled out of court. Each of the 5 women got $10,000 up front, a huge sum then, plus $600 a year for life, and all their medical bills paid.
A victory, but one they wouldn't live long to enjoy.
Exactly. As one of them said, they just wanted some of the comforts and joys of life before we go. They all died soon after. Their sacrifice bought them a little comfort and a lot of justice.
But the fight wasn't over. There was another plant in Ottawa, Illinois.
Yes, the Radium Dial Company. Catherine Wolfe Donahue and others started their own suit, but they faced an even bigger hurdle: the statute of limitations. In 1935, they were told they had waited too long to sue.
And the company just tried to disappear.
It was even worse this time. Radium Dial closed the Ottawa plant, moved to New York, and claimed the old company was defunct. It made it incredibly hard to even find someone to sue. But Catherine Wolfe Donahue was just fiercely determined.
She testified from her deathbed, didn't she?
She did. She was so ill she collapsed at one of the hearings, but she kept going, testifying from her bed. She actually survived just long enough to hear that the company's first appeal was denied. She died the day after they filed their next one.
Unbelievable. But the case went on.
It did. In 1939, the U.S. Supreme Court finally declined the company's last appeal, upholding the ruling for the Ottawa women.
But even after all that, after they won, they faced this weird social criticism.
It's a dark footnote, isn't it? Their struggle was criticized in some parts of the press as a consequence of women working outside the home. They were linked to the New Woman of the 1920s, and some articles basically said this tragedy was what happened when women dared to seek careers.
Just piling misogynistic insult onto terminal injury. But their ultimate legacy is, it's immortal. Their suffering fundamentally changed worker safety forever.
Absolutely. When World War II started and demand for luminous dials went up again, the new generation of painters was completely protected. Strict safety standards, banning lipping brushes, all based entirely on the knowledge gained from the bodies of the victims.
And that knowledge went straight into the nuclear age.
Directly. The Manhattan Project used the Radium Girls' experiences to create the first safety guidelines for plutonium workers. The effects of internal alpha radiation were so well documented from studying the girls that officials called their cases invaluable.
And the study of these women continued for decades.
Yes, at the Center for Human Radiobiology at Argonne National Laboratory. They tracked thousands of women, workers, and their families for decades. Regular testing, bone marrow biopsies, breath tests.
And they found cases of secondary contamination, right?
They did. They found one sister who never worked at the plant but was contaminated just from sharing a bed with her dial painter sister. The dust was that pervasive.
And all that research led to global policy changes.
It established the undeniable link between radiation levels and cancer. That led to the world's first maximum permissible standards for radiation workers. It was also critical for nuclear policy. Scientists realized strontium-90 from atomic tests behaved just like radium. It settled in the bones of children. That knowledge helped lead to the 1963 Limited Test Ban Treaty.
So their suffering didn't just protect factory workers, it helped protect the entire world from nuclear fallout. What happened to the factory sites? Did the companies ever clean up their mess?
The reckoning was incredibly slow. In 1979, the EPA found the old USRC site in New Jersey was 20 times too radioactive. And shockingly, nearly 750 homes have been built on top of the dumped waste.
People were living on it.
For decades. It wasn't until 1991 that the courts found USRC forever liable for the cleanup costs, and the Ottawa plant was even worse. When it was finally shut down in 1978, inspectors found radiation levels 1,666 times the safe limit. The building was so contaminated it had to be demolished.
The Radium Girls paid with their lives, but their fight created the safety standards we all rely on today in any industry that deals with hazardous materials.
It took decades for these women to fight back. I want to ask our listeners, if you were in their shoes in 1920 and the boss said it was safe, would you have believed them? Drop a comment below.
It really makes you wonder what safe things we use today might not be safe tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Declassified Diagnosis. If you want to hear another dark story right now, click the video on your right. To subscribe and catch the story we have for you tomorrow, click the button on your left. We'll see you there.